Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is part 2 of our exploration of Asian horror films released in 2010. Now thankfully, we have already churned our way through all of the dumpster juice from this particular year, so now we've entered the watchable range of movies, in my opinion. Movies that are pretty decent. And as always, titles for all the movies I discuss will be listed in the description box below. And our first film this evening is called The Haunted Tree, also known as Takien, a Thai horror romance. A woman seeks vengeance against the men who killed her family. So this begins quite tragically, with our protagonist, who's still living, encountering a series of terrible events that are mostly beyond her control. She loses her job, her boyfriend shows nude videos of her to his friends, and she travels back to her home village only to find that her family has died. So she hangs herself on the branch of a Takien tree, hence the alternate title of the film. Before the priests are capable of purifying her soul, she terrorizes all those who made her life miserable. That's a fairly basic premise, right? But the opening 30 minutes have an intriguing supernatural setup to it, with good direction and a lengthy sequence of funeral rites that I enjoyed. It could be the highlight of the film, actually. The acting is a bit on the melodramatic side, but I think it's somewhat acceptable considering that the theme of love is at play here. Unfortunately, the horror scenes themselves are probably the weakest parts of this film, often feeling silly and a bit lazy. However, there's moderate enjoyment from other aspects that help to pull this one through, I think, like the aforementioned scenes involving rituals. This is one of those occasions where, I simply found a horror film to be watchable enough, despite the fact that the scare tactics themselves are not particularly good. My advice to you is to do this here. If you're interested in this kind of film, watch the trailer on YouTube, and if it looks decent to you, check it out. If you think it looks stupid, then you could skip it. Either way, The Haunted Tree is actually quite difficult to find, so even if you do want to watch it, you may have difficulty. I'm almost certain I watched this on YouTube back in the day, but I couldn't find it when I looked for it the other day. So our next one tonight, we move to Japan for another film that's pretty obscure, unfortunately. That is Toshi Densetsu Shinrei Kojo. Say that 10 times real fast. This is a Japanese horror film, of course. A paranormal research college club investigates some reported activity at an abandoned house. A warehouse, actually. This is not exactly the most original premise, of course, but this film is, again, so obscure that I even questioned about covering it in this playlist, but I like to be comprehensive, and I'm trying to cover every Asian horror film I've seen. I also did purchase the DVD in Japan and still have it in my collection, even though I couldn't find it earlier tonight when I wanted to check out some of the scenes again. But I thought this was a decent little flick. Some of this is presented in a documentary style, format, because certain videos are viewed or recorded by our protagonists. So you do kind of have that Blair Witch element to it. But with that said, at least 50% of this film is shot conventionally in the third-person perspective. And from what I remember, the shifting in perspectives in this film did pretty much make sense, given the situation at hand. You know how in some of these films, the perspective shift and they really don't make sense? So this one, it seemed like it did. This is a low-budget, low-key, and slow-paced film, but it takes itself seriously, and because of that, it does create a fairly gloomy mood to it. There are also a few creepy scenes to enjoy. On the negative side, death scenes are kind of disappointing and a bit repetitive. For example, characters get dragged off the screen multiple times. Pacing is also a bit slow, but overall, I found it watchable, not a bad one. Now, the availability of this is that it is actually available on Region 2 DVD without subtitles. You may be able to find it by typing in the Romanized title. I guess that's what they call it. When you say Toshi Densetsu Shinrei Kojo, that's a Japanese language. There's also Japanese characters to interpret that, but there's also the romanization of that term, which is basically taking it and using English letters, you know what I mean, to basically spell it out. So you may be able to use the English letter title that I have in the description box to find this, but there's also a chance you may not be able to. Now our next film tonight is a bit lighter, still in Japan, takes itself far less seriously, and that is The Horny House of Horror. So in Japan, Nakazu is about to get married to a woman who insists on keeping up with his daily events through a cell phone. It doesn't seem too demanding, but apparently he thinks it's annoying. So his friends Toshida and Uno feel that Nakazu needs one last thrill before tying the knot. So they stumble upon a brothel called the Shogun Massage Parlor after a night of playing baseball, and they decide to get a little nasty. So Toshida and Uno insist on entering into the brothel and, have their boy pay for a fun evening. But the three men are presented with a line of female buttocks, yes, that are displayed through holes in a wall to give them a taste of what the brothel has to offer. Unfortunately for them, much pain awaits. So I'm not really the biggest fan of, trashy sex comedies, even ones with horror in it. This one's actually pretty good. The director here is a man named Jun Sujita, who is good friends with Noboru Iguchi, the man who directed The Machine Girl. Now, Sujita is apparently a big fan of American exploitation films and wanted to do something like that here. There is a lot of nudity and some sex in this. The actress Asami, who played a supporting role in The Machine Girl, is probably at her hottest in this film, so if you're a fan of her, then that's one reason to check it out. So the director accomplished that much, at least. There is also sufficient blood and gore on display, nothing excessive, but it's there. And thankfully, the characters avoid being annoying for the most part, and the humor is actually fairly effective, I thought. That's really what won me over on this. The humor was good enough to be moderately entertaining. This is pretty lowbrow entertainment, but I found it amusing. So, Horny House of Horror is, I don't think there was a DVD release in the United States, which is quite surprising, because they usually like to release these films here, that I'm aware of. Occasionally it pops up on YouTube, so keep on checking those streaming sites. Alright, we stay in Japan again. Our next film here is the 6th and final installment of the J-Horror Theater film series. Now remember, after the success of Ringu, that producer, Takashige Ichise, decided to launch a 6-film project. He recruited a different director to helm each film. Masayuki Ochiai directed Infection from 2004. Norio Surata directed Premonition, also from 2004. Takashi Shimizu directed Reincarnation from 2005. Kiyoshi Kurosawa directed Retribution in 2006, and Hideo Nakata directed Kaiden in 2007. Now, these are all recognizable directors for fans of Asian horror, and I personally enjoyed all of the aforementioned films to a greater or lesser degree. This final installment, however, was directed by a man named Hiroshi Takahashi, a very inexperienced director who previously gave us the hilarious cult film Sodom the Killer back in 2004. If you want a review of Sodom the Killer, check out Roger Swan's video of that one. He gives you an idea of what to expect. Pretty nutty cult film. Mostly a comedy. So how would this guy close out the quality of this particular film series? Well, let's take a look, because this is Kyofu, also known as The Sylvian Experiments or Out of Body, a Japanese horror film. So in this one, a neuron scientist and her husband discover a black and white 16mm film in the basement of a dilapidated hospital. The film documents underground experiments on a part of the human brain called the Sylvian fissure in an attempt to gain insight into the forbidden territory, so to speak. An invisible reality achieved through neither life or death. So obsessed with this surreal concept, the surgeon tries to reconstruct what she saw by recreating the experiment from the film. She monitors a nearby force that is known for attempted suicides and mines the bodies of individuals at the point of death and uses them as her test subjects. Now, this is a pretty interesting premise, man. So much so that it's arguably the most interesting premise of any film in this J-horror theater project. The Demented Doctor film is right up my alley. I like films like that. Unfortunately, this one does not fully cash in on the potential of that premise. We'll get to that in a minute. But first, let's go through a few positives here. First of all, there's a cool brain surgery scene that is showcased early on. Actually, whenever a character is shown on an operating table and the doctors are prodding their brains, things get pretty uncomfortable, and that's a good thing. Second, this is glacially paced, okay, focuses on creepiness, and has 0 jump scares. All big positives for me personally. The horror elements are rather unorthodox at times, with use of a glowing fog during the latter half. Direction's pretty good, actually, with some impressive lighting and overall style. The lead actress, Mina Fuji, looks like, actually to me, she looked like a Japanese version of Phoebe Cates, which is kind of an odd comparison, but if you watch this film, let me know if you agree with that. So now, the big flaw of Kayo Foo has been dutifully noted by many internet reviewers who have lambasted this film for being a mess. And I would say that criticism is rather justified. The plot rides heavily on the relationship between the neuron scientist and her 2 daughters, which I thought was kind of unnecessary. The relationship itself really did not contribute anything to this film. They could have been just a random girl who attempted suicide in the forest. I would have rather had this film focus more on the weird metaphysical concepts instead. One great example of this is the Canadian film Beyond the Black Rainbow from 2010, which is awesome because it really nails that feeling of having your brain melt with a metaphysical experiment. So if you were underwhelmed with Kayo Foo, check out Beyond the Black Rainbow. It's really good. Very weird, though. But to be fair, Kayo Foo does grab you early with its premise, and it gets a little bit of mileage out of it by introducing some hallucinations and dreams. But eventually, it will lose you a little bit because it doesn't really seem to explore the theme that much. And the traditional story elements are practically non-existent, so that doesn't help either. So, with all that said, more of a mood piece than anything else. If one allows the film to kind of wash over them, you may enjoy this. But I do think it's the weakest of this J-horror theater franchise, which is unfortunate because it was the last one. But overall, I thought this project, which some people have written off as kind of like just a cash-in of the Japanese horror thing, the popularity of J-horror in general, I think overall it was a success in terms of creativity and entertainment value. So, check out all these films if you're into that kind of thing. Now, availability for Kayo Foo is that it is widely available on DVD in the United States, and it's also streaming on multiple sites. Alright, our next film here is called Shin Mimibukuro 100 Stories, also known as Hyaku Monogatari. Alright, from Japan, of course. This is an anthology. So, in my coverage of 2003, I reviewed the Tales of Terror from Tokyo anthologies that contributed 64 short films, at least on the DVD release. There's like 4 United States DVDs that have 64 short films in them. And I also reviewed the anthology film from 2004. Those are neat little anthologies of short films, and Shin Mimibukuro 100 Stories is a continuation of that franchise. Now, there are apparently more installments to this franchise, but they are very difficult to track down because of 2 reasons. Number 1, they are not numbered, and number 2, they go under tons of different titles and came out over years of time. But still, if you come across one of these anthologies, not a bad night of entertainment. So as expected, Shin Mimibukuro 100 Stories is an anthology of 10 short films, 5 minutes each, which is consistent with that 2003 set. Similar in style and theme to those. Now, a time restriction of 5 minutes per story sounds like a bad idea, given the obvious limitations to character and storyline development, but these little stories provide a unique structure and have their advantages. Check out my Asian horror video from 2003, part 2, for more thoughts on that. But most of the segments in this one are pretty good, I thought. With a few standouts, like Story 4, which introduces a front door intruder. And it also has a few duds, like Story 2, which has a ghost girl cat fight. Yes. I'm not sure if it was intentionally played for laughs, but either way, it just was pretty lame. So I do recommend this. Shin Mimibukuro, 100 stories. And remember, there are tons of titles. If you go on Yes Asian and type in Shin Mimibukuro, there might be a handful of titles that pop up. So you'll want the one that says Hyaku Monogatari if you want this one. Alright, so this one is available on Region 2 DVD without subtitles. But again, the 5-minute short run times really, it kind of devalues dialogue anyway and character development, so it doesn't really hurt the enjoyability that much. Alright, now we shift to South Korea for our next one. It's one of those sequels that I found to be better than the original. And that is Death Bell 2, Bloody Camp, also known as Gosa 2, South Korean horror. This begins with a teaching assistant who is having problems with some of her students, some of whom have little to no ambition in terms of studying. Who does, really? It's time for summer classes, though, so you know something bad is going to happen. Obviously, there's fewer students in the school, so the limited number of students makes the possibility of something bad happening all the more. Actually, if you've seen the first Death Bell film, then you have a pretty good idea of what kinds of bad things are going to happen here. These students will soon be trapped inside the school with a killer on the loose. This is somewhat implausible and thin slasher film with a backdrop of revenge to it. Critically lambasted online by most online reviewers. They go on and on about how much this movie stinks. A little bit of an over-exaggeration, I think. What's ironic is that this is, I believe, an overall improvement on the original film, which gets pretty good reviews. But I dislike that one. So I'm in the minority on this opinion. Unlike the first Death Bell film, the director here can actually hold a shot for longer than a millisecond, and the editor was able to stop him or herself from butchering the images in post-production. So that in and of itself makes this sequel more watchable than its predecessor. I absolutely hated the direction and the editing of the first Death Bell film. Now the tempo in this one, pretty brisk. A runtime of 84 minutes presents a rare instance of brevity in South Korean cinema. If you're familiar with it, they usually always come close to that 2-hour mark, but not here. And, there is one memorable death scene involving a motorcycle with slasher blades on the tires, which is pretty cool. There probably could have been more memorable death scenes, though, since the rest of the film, the death scenes in the rest of the film are just kind of okay and pretty good. Backstory is definitely better than the first installment, with nothing particularly mind-blowing, but it is a little bit more effective in terms of dramaticism. So Death Bell 2 is certainly not a great film. It has a number of mediocre elements, and there are some ghostly visions at the beginning that feel unnecessary, which is, again, similar to the first film, but it is a watchable piece of fluff if you're in a good mood, or in a mood for fluff. So Death Bell 2 is moderately available on DVD. I was able to find it on some sites, not on others, so, if you really want it, check it out. Alright, our next film here is another critically lambasted film, but it's from Hong Kong. And it's one that, again, I thought was decent enough for a watch. If you're a fan of these particular franchises or these particular kinds of films, usually you're able to get a little bit more enjoyment out of these. And this one is called The Child's Eye. In Bangkok, 6 Chinese people on vacation find themselves stranded at an airport due to a riot. So a driver takes them to Chung Tai Hotel, where Rainey sees a female ghost and Ling finds a hovering hand trying to grab her. While at dinner, the 3 male travelers disappear, so Rainey leads the girls with the aid of her ghost-seeing dog named Little Huang as they try to find them in the hotel's underground passageways, where they encounter a female ghost and a strange monster. This was directed by the Pang brothers, and it's the 4th installment of of the Eye franchise. I enjoyed the Eye, and I enjoyed the Eye 2, but dislike the Eye 3, which is also known as the Eye 10 for no good reason. So the plot, or maybe there was a reason for that. I don't remember. There's no point. The plot of The Child's Eye sounds rather stupid, though, doesn't it? And it kind of is. The story, the script, character development are all on the weak side on this. This film, as I said, gets pretty bad reviews online, and I can understand why. But I did like some of the superficial elements in this. The lighting and the scoring are pretty effective at creating spooky atmosphere for most of the runtime. I remember some green lighting that's used at times, which is always a nice touch. Some of the film takes place in a horrific alternate dimension, too, which is a concept that I'm always interested in seeing. These directors do mix in some creative stuff as well. Dogs have some relevance to the story, which is, again, something a little bit different. Some of the horror scenes during the middle section, in particular, are long-lasting and rather fun. There's also a new monster that's both unique and a bit creepy, and it contributes to the best sequence in the film. The ending, somewhat unsatisfying, didn't really finish with a bang, but still, as I say in this video, it's a watchable film, in my opinion. More so for its aesthetics than anything else. Now, The Child's Eye is available on Region 3 DVD. Alrighty. Man, are we already on the last film of the evening? Gracious. Is that true? Did I skip any? I don't think so. I'm mowing through them tonight. Alright. So our final film is another odd documentary-style horror film from Koji Shiraishi, the man who gave us Noroi, as well as many others. And that is White Eyes, also known as Shirome. Japanese horror comedy. So Wikipedia actually has an excellent little plot summary, so I will quote and paraphrase them here. So director Koji Shiraishi wants to film an episode for a television program featuring members of an all-girl idol group. Now, the program is one wherein minor celebrity guests are employed to investigate haunted houses and similarly mysterious locales in an attempt to determine the truth about such places and their associated paranormal phenomena. So the members of this idol group are asked to visit an abandoned school where a shrine to a minor deity known as Shirome is located. Now, according to local legends, if Shirome is asked to grant a wish, he will do so, but only if the person asking is completely sincere in their request. If any wish is asked in a frivolous manner, Shirome will destroy that person. So the setup here is actually quite similar to the real-life television show Scare Tactics, where unsuspecting people will be secretly videotaped when a fake threat is introduced by the production team, just to scare them on camera for the benefit of all of the television viewers. So if you have not seen Scare Tactics, you should probably check it out because there are some hilarious moments in that show. Now, in Shirome, this idol group is lured into this school. The film crew and special effects team are then asked to promptly scare the crap out of them for our amusement. Now, this premise is used in rather simplistic ways, but it is oddly enjoyable to watch. The girls do become annoying at times. They even perform some songs and dances, but I think this was intentionally provoked by Shiraishi. It helps to set the stage for the viewer to get a kick out of watching them scare these girls out of their wits. However, there are some really odd things about this concept. Shiraishi likes to add in weird stuff and do things differently in a creative fashion. One thing I noticed is that there are special effects that were added in post-production that were not visible to these girls as part of the prank. So I interpreted this as, the purpose of which was to provoke a traditional response to documentary-style horror from the viewer's perspective. Almost as if these prankster filmmakers accidentally captured the image of a real ghost while playing this prank on this idol group. So the final scene after the credits is another attempt at this realism, the effectiveness of which is, it'll probably vary based on the viewer's personal, personal tastes. I thought it worked pretty good and added something different. Definitely an unconventional way to present a documentary-style film, but again, this is Shiraishi we're talking about, so it's no surprise. The filmmaking style also made me question whether or not this idol group was made aware of the premise of the film before entering the school. Because if Shiraishi is willing to throw in these these special effects in post-production that really has no effect on the prank being played, then, what would stop him from telling this idol group beforehand, the setup, and they're just trying to act their way as being scared? But I don't know. I mean, I thought their scared faces were genuine, I guess is what I could say. So, but you question it, and it makes you think a little bit during the film. You know what I mean? I thought they were legitimately scared, but that's me. There are a few negatives here, though, to point out, is that, the film never really gets scary, and from the viewer's perspective. More of an amusing film rather than a terrifying one, so you should go in with that expectation. It also does move fairly slowly. So, Shirome, let's check the availability here, is available streaming on Amazon Instant, and I think you still get some DVDs floating around out there. So yeah, tonight we had a few interesting films. A lot of these are definitely not high-quality films for the most part. I would say probably the anthology films are probably the better ones. Shin Mimibukuro, 100 Stories is probably one to go for if you like those Tales of Terror from Tokyo series. And, yeah, so it's some interesting stuff here, some unorthodox stuff, too. So, those are the films for this evening, and be sure to join me for part 3 of this video, and we'll get cracking on some of the better films from this year. And as always, we will see you next time.